It's almost always a good idea to let people know you have a good sense of humor, because in this society, we take humor very seriously. And by the way, you do have a good sense of humor, don't you? I'm confident you'll answer in the affirmative, because virtually everyone is sure they have a good sense of humor, and we'll be talking more about that later. Right now, I just want to emphasize how important humor is as an aspect of strong character. Yet, if you were to ask 100 people to name character's most vital elements, I doubt if more than 5 would refer to humor. In fact, I don't think any would. When he wrote his classic study of American society in the early 18th century, the Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville, predicted that if the United States ever came to be ruled by a dictator, it would be someone with a well-developed sense of humor. If this is true, it's certainly a very different situation than you would find in any other country in the world. Think of the communist or fascist dictators who have played such a major role in 20th century history. They were not exactly a bunch of laugh-a-minute guys. They were good at projecting anger, and they were good at creating fear, but humor? No. Americans, however, respond to very different qualities in their leaders. And though they were obviously not dictators or tyrants, it's true that most of our beloved national leaders have had the ability to make others laugh and to laugh at themselves. Though he was fundamentally a rather melancholy man, Abraham Lincoln was also renowned as a humorist. Every biography of Lincoln refers to his love of funny stories and his willingness to stop and tell a joke even in the midst of important business. And in more recent times, Presidents Franklin Roosevelt, John Kennedy, and Ronald Reagan were able to smooth out the ups and downs of their political careers with humor, and it was often directed at themselves. People could see that these men were strong enough and confident enough to make jokes at their own expense. And as we'll discuss later, these men were also wise enough to apply humor carefully and at the right times. When we recognize those abilities in a person, we're able to believe they'll also be strong and confident in serious or even dangerous situations. I'd like to elaborate a bit on a comparison I made earlier about how creating your character is like an artist creating a sculpture. The essential point is this: I don't think character is something that just happens by itself, any more than a chisel can create a work of art without the hand of an artist guiding it. In both instances, a conscious decision has been made. A conscious process of design is at work. Character is the result of hundreds and hundreds of choices you may make that gradually turn who you are at any given moment into who you want to be. If that decision-making process is not present, you'll still be somebody. You'll still be alive, but may have a personality rather than a character. And to me, that's something very different. This has always been a country in which people have felt free to change themselves and the circumstances in which they live. In this regard, I happen to come across some interesting facts about the 19th century settlers who crossed the plains in covered wagons. For the most part, these people were neither recent arrivals on our shores, nor were they facing any special economic difficulties. Instead, they were shopkeepers, farmers, and tradesmen who simply decided to make some big changes in their lives in the hope of finding something better, despite all the dangers and uncertainties. No one really knows why this great migration began, but I suspect it had something to do with our fundamental belief in individual freedom and the idea that if there's something better at the end of the rainbow, we have a responsibility to take advantage of it. That's the basis for our discussion of character in this program. Character isn't something you were born with and can't change like your fingerprints. It's something you weren't born with, and that you must take responsibility for making. You may not be able to cross the Rocky Mountains in a covered wagon, but you can still create a better life for yourself by crossing the mountains of your soul, and that may be even a greater challenge. There used to be a joke about football teams that lost every game. The coach would say, "Well, we built a lot of character this year, didn't we?" As if character is something that you settle for when you haven't achieved what you really wanted. There's really very little difference between the graceful passes the bullfighter makes with the bull and the fluid motions of a martial arts master who's defending himself against an aggressor. In both cases, the strength and the aggression of the opponent is made to work for the defender. It's like opening a door just as the battering ram is about to break it down, so that forward velocity carries the invaders through the gate, past the mark, and on to destruction. Little children often play a similar game when in a match of tug-of-war. One side suddenly lets go of the rope, and the opposing side falls down. Up to now, we've mostly talked about what might be called tactical flexibility, where a specific situation requires a knowledge of the various alternatives, and a specific set of circumstances requires nimbleness and dexterity. More difficult and more important is the inner flexibility and long-range adaptability that are called for from the person who wants not just to survive, but succeed. A very wise man once said, "You can't step in the same river twice. Every moment all things are changing, and the next minute is never like the last one. Whenever you achieve a hard-won success, it's always because you've been able to create a flexible response to the conflicting needs and ambitions and feelings of other people. You've been able to sidestep the accidents of fate and the quirks of nature and the innate tendency we all have to depend on yesterday's solutions to solve today's problems." I spoke earlier of how the founding fathers relied on the example of Rome as they constructed the framework of American democracy. It's interesting to observe that at one of the times of greatest luxury and power and perhaps complacency ever in the history of the world, the heyday of the Roman Empire, a philosophy arose that attempted to teach these men who ruled the known world how to govern themselves. These philosophers, who called themselves Stoics, taught that in order simply to survive in life, let alone be a leader, you must learn to take responsibility for the way things affect you. At the same time, you must learn to bend with the wind of forces too great for your control. This kind of self-measurement and self-control should be part of every grown-up's character. After all, an adult is the leader of his own family, of his children, who grow up in part learning from his example. To be firm but fair, to be clear and consistent but flexible, is to possess maturity.
It's that by exposing yourself to different environments, you put different physiological demands on yourself all the way down to the genetic level, and that manifests new elements of you. And so one of the things that happens to people, and this is a very common cultural notion, is that you should go on a pilgrimage at some point to somewhere central, and that would be, say, like the rock in the Pride Rock in The Lion King.
And when you get away from distraction and you immerse yourself in deep creativity and creation, and you find your laboratory, or what I call your Menlo Park, like Edison had his Menlo Park, which was with the wilderness away from the world, what happens? The prefrontal cortex gets silent, and it's called transient.
Remember what that feels like, and then remember that those minutes, and those hours, they turn into weeks and months and years, and holding the line in those critical minutes will put you in an infinitely better place, physically and mentally, if you maintain the discipline.
I think most businesses fail. Most brands never make it. Most people never reach their greatness because they don't know how to tell their story.
Yes, that's major.
What will you be sharing with the audience? Because look, man.
Let me just share with you why the
Laws of
story is
Success.
important. Yes. Why the story is important is because when you speak, if you're selling, you're an entrepreneur, you got a product, you have an expertise, knowledge is a new currency. People are asking 3 questions. Who are you? What do you have? And why should I care? And so if you don't answer that, because we know people do business with
what, why?
Who are you?
Yeah.
What do you have? And why should I care? People do business with people they know, like, and trust. And when you can answer that, now you're building a rapport and a connection that creates a possibility where you can do business together and help each other go to that next level.